Welcome to our next episode of Financial Minds Meet the Experts. If you are new to this podcast, I'm Jaime Agostino, your host. On this show, we're joined by financial industry experts to talk about topics, trends, and themes that credit union professionals need to know about. Today on Financial Minds Meet the Experts, we're discussing wire fraud. What is it? What are the different types? And much more. My guests today include my favorite compliance person, Vizo Financial's Compliance and Fraud Risk Director, Cindy Hagan. And new to this podcast, we have Tarah Sweigart, Payments Risk Analyst for Vizo Financial. Cindy, Tarah, thank you both so much for joining me today. Cindy, you're a returning guest, but Tarah, this is your first time with us. So would you mind sharing just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jaime. Good to be with you, Cindy. My name's Tarah. I joined Vizo in January of this year. Prior to that, I've had about 20 years experience in the financial industry, most of that being in the payments world. But when coming to Vizo, I shifted to the compliance and risk team using some of my past experience, to help support members and staff across Vizo.
All right. Well, I appreciate you being here. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure. So Tarah, kick us off. What is wire fraud?
Yeah, so wire transfers is a common service that institutions will offer to their members or customers. And it's an electronic method to send funds for an individual or business to send funds either domestically or internationally. It's generally safe and secure when there's proper controls or procedures in place. But since it's a fast way to send money and it's final and irrevocable, this makes it an appealing method for scammers to get money. So many times, scammers will pose as a trusted source, such as a family member, a love interest, or even a business associate. And this can happen both externally with the member or business, or internally at the institution with an employee. So if the scammer can mislead or defraud a member, consumer, a customer, employee, they have the ability to move the money quickly. So essentially, wire transfer fraud is just using wire transfers with the intent or deceive members to get that money.
Okay. Well, are there different types of wire fraud?
Yes. So a lot of times we'll see the same sort of scenarios play out with these scammers. For instance, there will be that romance love interest. And in this scenario, a scammer will often build a relationship with a member, and that could be days or even months where they're just, making that connection, building their trust, and eventually it'll come to the point of they have an emergency and they need that money. And because that trust has been built, the member has no problem sending that money because they just want to help somebody that they now care about. And then similar to that, there's the family emergency. And in this scenario, this is where somebody poses as a relative or maybe a close friend, and they're requesting your help, whether that's a hospital bill or they need to get out of jail or even another country. And they're saying, help me, I need this money. And because it's somebody you love and care about, you're willing to send that money without questioning it, really. And again, the scammer is just trying to get the money quickly, so they're going to pull at your heartstrings to do that.
Yeah, actually.
So those are some of the relationship type of scams that we see with wire transfers. But there's also sort of the business end, which that can be advance fees like rental properties or real estate scams. And this is when, maybe a property's listed as a low cost, or the scammer attempts to give a check to somebody to deposit and wire the funds out, or they could even impersonate the agent at a real estate company. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to divert the funds or change the wire instructions to get the member to send the money out, thinking it's a legitimate request. And then I'd say the last common scenario that we see is that email compromise with businesses or changing that wire instruction. So This could be coming at the business, so the business's system got compromised, an employee there, or it could be internally at an institution where a CEO or an executive's email was compromised. And what's happening is the scammer will email an employee saying, send out this money. They could change a wire that already exists, change the beneficiary institution, or they could provide all new instructions. And because of who it's coming from, employees will often they'll want to move quickly and they want to please. So they often don't question the legitimacy of that payment. But again, the scammer's trying to get that money and they're trying to put on that pressure to get it quickly.
Jamie, I want to hop in here, and I think Tarah's really hit on some key points on this. It's a sense of urgency. Your member is walking in and feels often very legitimately that they've got to get this to happen right away. And our natural instinct as human beings is to want to help them as quickly as possible. And sometimes that very instinct keeps us from doing what we know we should be doing, taking those steps, taking a minute to ask a more probing question or to clarify information. We've had instances where member credit unions have wired out funds and employees with years of experience who didn't take the time to just check with the CEO if that was a legitimate email or ask the member one or two questions. They've come in and changed a wire instruction for a property settlement. And suddenly it's going to an individual in an unrelated state, not to a settlement company or an attorney's office. And they didn't ask. Nobody's clarifying. And it's heartbreaking because, as Tarah said, those are irrevocable funds. When they're gone, they are gone. And I think even beyond many of the transactions we do for members, wires really should make you stop and think and complete the process according to your procedures at your institution, protecting not just your member, but your institution. It's a nightmare when it happens.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, as Tarah was speaking, you were actually using a scenario that, I can actually speak from a personal side of things. This was a couple months ago. My in-laws, who are late 80s, late 70s, they got a phone call from a gentleman impersonating my nephew, claiming that he was in an accident and he was actually in jail, and he needed to be bailed out, and that somebody was going to call him, call them to get wire instructions so that they could send them money to cover his bail to get him out of jail. And my in-laws panicked, we're sure. Freaking out. And they made one positive thing that they did is they said, well, we don't have access to get to those right now. We have to call my son to go to the bank, to send this wire. And then the person hung up immediately. But that still left them panicked that they thought their grandson was in prison, and my husband had to come in, call my nephew. So are you in jail right now? And my nephew was like, no, I'm at work, and then we had to calm them down. And, that in itself is, scary, that they were so upset.
Stressful.
Yeah. So
yes, it can be scary, and that's what oftentimes will happen is they are looking for that little button to hit that somebody won't really ask the questions, and it's somebody they care about, or so, and many of us will do anything we can to help our loved ones.
Yeah. And what's so sad is, they obviously did their research. They knew my nephew's name. They were impersonating him, said they were injured, which is why they were talking different. Like, they did all these things, and it just, it's so sad. So, so how can we help prevent wire fraud?
Yeah, so I think Cindy kind of hit it right on the nail there, where it's having those procedures and controls in place at the institution. Kind of taking that time to walk through your process and seeing, are they solid, secure? What steps are we taking to reduce risk? What questions are we asking, or should we be asking? So, for example, how are we verifying members' wire requests, or how are they authenticating to access a wire system? Are we using multi-factor authentication? In the wire process, is there segregation of duties or dual control, or do we have limits and thresholds as far as funds availability, are we requiring the member to have that money before they send it out? And then there's also, sort of those detections and preventative processes you can put in place, like anomaly. Is there any unusual activity for this member? Do you have a know your customer process in place? Does your financial institution accept requests through email? And if you do, what controls do you have in place when that occurs, or fax? So I think the first part is procedures, really taking a look at your procedures and controls, that step-by-step process, and seeing like where is there potential gaps, like asking that question, really analyzing it. After that, I believe it's education for your staff, education for your members. Are they aware of the different scenarios of how people are being targeted? Do they know that, the risks related to wires, and that you really shouldn't be wiring to someone you don't know? Or, as you had mentioned, your family member called the other family member to make sure that they were okay. And, having that verification process on their level, using a number that they know, not through email. Are they asking questions? Are they re-verifying? And do they know those red flags to kind of look out for when sending wire transfers? So I think it's really important to educate. And then once you have that knowledge base, you can start to feel more confident along with your procedures and controls.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we hear education a lot. I mean, it really is, the most important thing to do is educate staff on a variety of things. This is just one of them, as well as members. So Cindy, what do we do when a fraudulent wire has been sent? What's the financial institution supposed to do?
Well, the first thing to do when you realize that a wire has left your institution that was fraudulent is to utilize the service message. That's how institutions communicate with each other. Your natural inclination is to, I need to stop this, I need to fix this right now, and you want to just call somebody, you want to make it stop. But that really is the structured and formal way that you should be corresponding with another financial institution in order to request the return of those funds. If in fact you know or believe that they are part of a fraud or a scam, you should indicate that in your service message so that the other institution recognizes that and would hopefully be able to at least put those funds on hold until some kind of resolution can be reached. That's your first best angle of attack. Now, let's say we're a little further down the process than that, and you simply have a member who has been a victim. One of the important resources for your membership is to be able to reach out to law enforcement, because from a realistic sense, your local law enforcement is only so helpful in that regard. It's not really their jurisdiction typically. This is usually a scammer who is out of the area, sometimes out of country. And so local law enforcement wouldn't really play into your scenario. And that's when you want to reach out to the FBI. And they've got a dedicated website. It's the letter I, the letter C, the number 3, ic3.gov. It's the Internet Crime Complaint Center. And they really and truly are looking for that information, because it should come from your member. They're going to have the IP addresses and some of that technical data, because they were the contact, that they can forward on and complete the information. It's an online application or form submittal. And that lets the FBI collect that data, because you're not the only person, or your member is not the only person that this group or individual has victimized. So the more information they can gather, the more likely they are to find the perpetrator, and with any luck, get some return on funds for your member.
All right, thank you. Really appreciate you guys kind of teaching me a little bit more about wire fraud, as well as our listeners. Tarah, any final thoughts for our listeners today?
I would just say be prepared and be alert. I think, as Cindy mentioned, the first thing you want to do is send a service message if something happens. And that's the key, is nobody wants it to happen. But but the numbers that we're seeing, it's growing and it's not stopping. So these scammers, they're going to use their old methods, and as payments and technology develop, they're going to continue to find new ways to utilize and transfer these funds. So I think it's important to just stay prepared, be alert, and that you're confident that when this does occur, or you can either prevent it or know exactly what steps to take to help your member.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Tarah. Thank you, Cindy. Both, I appreciate you both so much for being here today to discuss wire fraud.
Thank you for having.
Sure.
Nice.
Another passion of our guest today, Cindy Hagan, is to provide education on elder abuse. They say age is just a number, but for scammers, age is an opportunity to prey upon a person's vulnerabilities. That's why older individuals are most at risk for financial exploitation, and it costs millions of dollars, per year in losses for these individuals. So on November 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Cindy will walk through some of the common signs, schemes, and suspects to help your staff and your members arm up against financial elder abuse during her free Addressing Elder Abuse webinar. Registration is open. Learn more at www.vfccu.org. As always, thanks for listening and make it a great day.